This podcast is dedicated to the good, the great, and the loved that we have lost in 2022. May you all rest in eternal peace. Hi everyone, Tracy DW here. Firstly, I'd like to say Happy 2023. Welcome to all my new listeners for coming on board, and thank you to my established listeners who have liked, commented and shared my episodes during the last 12 months. Secondly, it's wonderful to see a growing audience for this podcast, and it's my prayer that 2023 will be a year where you will all experience great opportunities and fulfill many of your aspirations. Let's make 2023 a year of continuous personal growth and personal fulfillment, where we continue to uplift and support each other through the amazing journey that we know as life. At the end of 2022, I shared extracts from a selection of my favourite podcast episodes from the second season. In this episode, it's your turn. I'm kicking off 2023 with an episode dedicated to you in sharing extracts from episodes that you enjoyed listening to over the last season and crowned them your season's best. Now, some of the top episodes will not be a part of this particular countdown as they have been mentioned in the previous episode, such as Remembering Patrice Lumumba, Whose War Is It Anyway, and The Wealth That We All Have in Common. They were some of my favourite as well as yours, so you can go back and listen to the previous episode or the full episodes on your listening platform. So, without further delay, let's begin your top 5 countdown of your season's best. At number 5, it's Let's Talk About the Walk, where I shared my reflections and analysis of the learning programme I created for the diverse curriculum for the London Borough of Hackney. Remember, you can contribute to the conversation about diversity in the school curriculum, and if you work in the education sector, feel free to share what you are doing in your own setting. Just click on the SpeakPipe link in the show notes and record your message, or you can email me at info@storiestobetold.com, which is also in the show notes. Trying to create change in isolation is always difficult, and this is why the display board approach often becomes self-defeating, as a display board easily loses its novelty appeal and soon becomes just another fixture. Many of us have tried to work as change agents in our schools, seeing Black History Month as an opportunity to put something in place that will create change and have a ripple effect, but quite often this ripple rarely goes beyond the end of the month and ends up, you guessed it, staying on the display board. In at number 4, it's Painting the Map Red. Is China breaking up the Commonwealth? Now, this is an interesting episode choice, as China has been at the centre of global foreign policy for the last 3 years now, due to the rise in tensions and protests in Hong Kong and the COVID pandemic with its tough zero COVID restrictions on its own population. These restrictions were recently lifted, and the Chinese have been able to experience international travel for the first time in almost 3 years. As well as having vested interests across the African continent, China is also watching Europe with interest as the war between Russia and Ukraine continues to intensify. It's probably time for each country in the Commonwealth to reassess its relationship with Britain and its role in the world, but is the Commonwealth going through an evolution of its own anyway? In these present times, we are witnessing the invasion of several European sovereign nations as Russia aims to rebuild its empire, but we are also witnessing the transition of many former British colonies into another empire. As China's influence has been growing, the part of the map of the African continent which used to be distinctly pink now has a more crimson hue. Here, we see two contrasting approaches to empire building. One nation is using force, while another is using more subtle and sophisticated means. But both China and Russia have the same aims: to achieve geopolitical influence and soft power across the world. Okay, at number 3, it's Fire Sale Expanded. And I dedicate this episode to all my listeners and readers from across the pond. Now, I've always had the impression that African Americans are so clued up and aggressive about learning and preserving their history and traditions, both in acknowledging their African heritage as well as their hard fought for social, political, and economic achievements. However, in my interview with Angela Thomas Smith, founder of the African American Literacy Awareness Campaign last October, I was concerned to hear her comments that history and social studies were topics that were in danger of being cancelled out of the curriculum in schools across America. I've always included America in my learning journey throughout Stories to be Told because it has evolved from the 13 colonies, beginning in 1607, when the first English settlers arrived to build the settlement which became known as Jamestown, after the King of England at the time, James I. This became the capital of what was the oldest English colony. This became the capital of what was to become the oldest English colony, Virginia. England's colonisation of North America emanated from this point, with the first enslaved Africans shipped across the Atlantic from around 1619 onwards to construct and work on tobacco plantations. In this episode, I share my perspective in answering the question, how did America get here? The Louisiana Purchase added another 13 states to the existing colonies, and this created disputes between the northern and southern colonies on whether slavery should be extended into these new territories. Both the northern colonies, who opposed slavery, and the southern colonies, who upheld slavery practices, feared that each of the newly formed states would cede to its opponent. The first 2 decades after the purchase saw the newly formed states gradually administered into the Missouri Compromise in 1820, a system that institutionalized slavery in Missouri while eliminating it in the state of Maine, which was located right next to it. This was to ensure and agree that the northern states would never be able to legislate against slavery in the remaining land from the Louisiana Purchase. This was poor compensation rather than a compromise, and thus sowed the seeds for the American Civil War and the ideologies that are characteristic of American society and politics that we see today. As well as this episode, I have explored other topics in American history, such as the Book of Negroes, in an episode of the same name from the first season, and the American War of Independence in my episode War Crimes, Part 1, from the second season. And in addition to that, my poetic narrative Bite from the Big Apple, A Story for New York, was published last summer and is available on Amazon and other online reading platforms. The link is also in the show notes. In at number 2, it's Let's set the record straight. This episode was really a chance for me as an author and contributor to have a reality check of my own why and to evaluate my own brand story. Every now and then something comes across your path to make you question and reevaluate what you're doing, a negative review, as well as a positive email message. It's just as important to clarify what stories to be told is, as well as what it is not. At the end of the day, it's about relevance in providing what you, my listeners, readers, and co learners want to read, listen to, and learn more about. Because if no one is talking to you or about you, then you're not being relevant. Many of you understood this message and its intentions. I encourage young learners to learn more about Britain's colonial past because it was a subject that is often viewed as an uncomfortable truth. However, I knew that I could make a valuable contribution as a school leader and educationalist by delivering the learning through my poetic narratives, alternative history artwork, mini documentaries, learning journeys, and this podcast series, all of which aims to deliver this uncomfortable truth in a way that is thought-provoking, imaginative, and engaging, helping you as my co-learners to make connections between present-day consequences of past events and to look at single events in relation to the wider global context taking place at the same time. I hope to include guesting as part of my podcast format in the near future so as to include your contributions as well as others who have a perspective to share on the subject of colonialism. It's also a learning journey about how the British Empire affected not just Africans but all people of colour. And it aims to appeal to those of you who are passionate about history and interested in the subject. These intentions are the part that I can control. What I cannot control is the interpretation that you, as the listener, reader, learner, or spectator, bring to it. And so, finally, at number 1, imaginary drum roll, we finish the countdown on a sensitive topic and one which is really close to my heart. And this topic also seems to resonate with you. It's War Crimes Part 3, Children in the Military. In this episode, I share my reflections and perspective on the tragedy of the child soldier as a form of child exploitation, which in some parts of the world is overlooked, while in other parts of the world it is still the reality of daily life for tens of thousands of children. I'm proud of this episode as my small contribution in raising awareness about this uncomfortable truth. This demonstrates that war creates a graveyard for the living as well as the dead, where dreams and potential have died through the limited choices and opportunities that present themselves in the aftermath of war. This graveyard is not only where adults but also children are found, whether they are civilians or have been drafted into the military. When I saw the arrest, detention and trial of the Russian soldier Vladimir Shishimari, I was inspired to focus on children in the military for this podcast episode. At the age of 21, Vladimir Shishimari is legally an adult, but as I took a closer look at his face, I said to myself, he's just a boy. I could only see all the unfulfilled dreams and unrealized potential in this young person's life. I began to think about the countless children and youth who, throughout history, and particularly at this time, are caught up, trapped and entrapped into circumstances beyond their free will, autonomy and decision making, and whose lives have been reduced to nothing more than body counts. With this sobering thought, my heart sank. So there you are, your season's best for 2022. You can find the links to the story for New York, my email address, and the links for all the full episodes that I have mentioned in this episode in the podcast show notes. And speaking of those stories, don't forget what I call the heart and soul of the Stories to be Told movement, my other stories or poetic narratives: Caribbean Wind, Caribbean Rush, Nights at the Round Table, the Berlin Conference 1884, and Gone with the Wind, Macmillan's Speech for Change. They're all available on the website in both Kindle and paperback formats. And also the publication of the other latest titles in the series. If you want to find out more, just visit storiestobetold.com and check out the learning platforms for The Journey's End, Giving Back Hong Kong, Hope for Zimbabwe, Arise the Phoenix, and A Story for South Africa. The links are also in the show notes. 2023 is going to be a year of further growth and development with Stories to be Told. I'll be planning a series of pop-up shops with story reading sessions, as well as presentations of my learning programme. In addition to this, there'll be more giveaways of stories and promotional merchandise every month from January to the end of the third season in October 2023. You can find out more by visiting the website. And for those of you who are on my mailing list, I'm designing a monthly newsletter, something else that's also new, which I'll be launching on February the 1st, the start of US Black History Month and African Heritage Month in Canada. This newsletter is just to keep you up to speed with what's happening. If you're not a part of the email list, what are you waiting for? Visit storiestobetold.com and sign up, where you can opt in and receive your free samples of my first 4 titles. It's the only way to enter the draw for a chance to win a giveaway. Someone will be selected from the list each month and will receive either a story title or some other promotional merchandise. Details will be shared on the promotion page of the website very soon. Feel free to like, follow and share us on social media when you visit the website. Just click on whichever social media link you would like to follow us on. And as always, it is a pleasure and a privilege to share my learning journey with you in this podcast series, and I encourage you to either begin or continue your own. History is a matter of fact or perspective. I'm Tracy DW, and this is a Stories to be Told podcast, wishing you all a positive and prosperous start to 2023. Stay safe, stay well, and stay blessed. Thanks so much for listening, and I'll see you on the next page.